Growing up, it was no secret that my sister, Emily, was the favorite. She was the star child who could do no wrong, the one my parents always bragged about.
Me?
I was the quiet one, the afterthought. I made my peace with it long ago. I was independent, learned to fend for myself, and eventually I built my own life away from the family spotlight. But there was one thing I thought I could always count on: the inheritance my grandparents left specifically for me. At least, I thought I could. This story isn't one of a tragic downfall. It's about how I fought back and won more than just my rightful inheritance. But let me take you back to the beginning where it all started. About a year ago, my parents started acting strange. I noticed they were avoiding certain topics, especially when it came to finances or anything related to family property. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, but my gut told me otherwise. My parents were hiding something, and it didn't take long for me to find out what it was. One night, I went over to their house for dinner. While my mom was in the kitchen and my dad was in the living room watching TV, I found myself wandering into his study. My dad's study had always been off limits, but the door was cracked open that night. Something pulled me in. I knew it wasn't right, but I needed to know what was going on. Inside, on his desk, I saw a stack of papers. My name caught my eye immediately. I recognized some of the documents from when my grandparents passed away. They detailed the inheritance they had left for me. But something new was tucked behind them, a freshly printed will. As I read it, my stomach dropped. They were transferring my inheritance to Emily. The very money my grandparents had set aside for me, specifically because they knew I would need it more, was being quietly redirected to my sister. No warning, no conversation, nothing. I was furious. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the betrayal, the absolute lack of respect for me. All my life, I'd lived in Emily's shadow, but this felt like the ultimate slap in the face. I knew I had to confront them.
But I wanted to be smart about it.
I copied the documents and made an appointment with a lawyer. After explaining the situation, he told me that my grandparents' original will might have a clause that could help me. But we needed to dig deeper, to find out. While I waited for the lawyer to look into it, I confronted my parents. The next day, I went over to their house again, but this time, I was ready. I placed the copied documents on the dining table in front of them. Care to explain this? I asked, my voice calm, but firm. My parents exchanged nervous glances before my mom finally spoke. We thought Emily would make better use of it, she said, stumbling over her words. You've always been so independent, and she's just had more challenges in life. Challenges? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Emily, the one who had everything handed to her, was somehow the one with challenges? It was ridiculous. You mean because I've worked hard for everything I have and she hasn't? They didn't say anything. They couldn't. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for an apology that never came. They were silent, unwilling to admit what they had done was wrong. My father finally spoke, his voice flat and unapologetic. It's done. There's nothing you can do about it. Those words stung. They hit harder than I expected. But little did they know, my grandparents had prepared for this. When I returned to my lawyer, he had found a letter attached to the original will. A letter addressed to me. In it, my grandparents wrote that they had suspected my parents might try something like this. They knew how much favoritism had played out in my life, and they wanted to protect me from it. So, they had placed a clause in their will. If my parents ever tried to transfer or withhold my inheritance, I would receive not only the original amount, but an additional trust that they had secretly set up. This trust was twice the size of the original inheritance. My grandparents knew me better than I had ever realized. They had planned for everything. With the new information in hand, I scheduled another meeting with my parents. I didn't tell them what I had discovered right away. I wanted them to see how far they had gone before I delivered the final blow. When I arrived at their house, they were both sitting at the dining table, clearly uncomfortable. Emily was there too, which surprised me at first, but it all made sense when I realized they had probably told her about the inheritance. She looked smug, almost like she knew she had already won. I pulled out the letter from my grandparents and handed it to them. As they read through it, their expressions shifted from confusion to shock, and finally, to defeat. Emily's smile faded as she realized what was happening. You tried to take what was mine, I said, my voice steady. But thanks to Grandma and Grandpa, I'm getting more than you ever planned. My parents looked devastated. For the first time, they had no words. Emily sat in silence, her face pale. I could see the wheels turning in their heads, trying to figure out how they could fix this. But there was nothing they could do. It was over. I left their house that day knowing I had won. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about reclaiming my worth, standing up for myself, and finally stepping out of Emily's shadow. The inheritance allowed me to start a business I'd always dreamed of, but the real victory was the peace of mind that came with knowing my grandparents had seen me for who I truly was. To this day, my relationship with my parents and sister remains strained. They've tried to apologize, to make amends, but I've chosen to keep my distance. I learned that family isn't just about blood, it's about respect, trust, and fairness. In the end, I didn't just get what was mine. I got more than I ever imagined, both financially and emotionally. And that, my friends, is the best kind of justice.